This is the Where We Can Agree stream. Just going to check on YouTube. I don't see us. I don't even know how to tell if we're in. Better no, don't want the echo. But we are officially on YouTube now.
Very cool.
Very cool. Not on Rumble yet. And I don't know if Restream still uses Rumble or not, but YouTube will have to do for now. It's just important that we talk about the world and what is going on and where we need to be, what we need to do to get where we want to be.
Right. And we're perfectly safe on YouTube until we get thrown off. So
until we get thrown off. Well, I don't plan on saying anything that we shouldn't say, but that's my opinion.
I think, as with everything else, you have to be complained about. You can say anything you want on the internet, provided no one complains about you. And as soon as they do, then you're done for.
Well, I don't have any complaints. And we had a grand total. I believe last time I checked, we had 12 views of our last one. We did get some feedback from a couple of our Twitter followers, James Pruitt and Thane Eichenhauer. So thank you for that. We'll try to get to those. I don't know if we can get to the banking collapse in too much detail. But there was an interesting article, but it was very long. But maybe we can touch on that as we go through our topics of discussion. But one thing that did come up last time, Greg, sorry, everybody, I'm the Cul-de-Sac Hero. My co-host is the venerable Greg Swan from Self-Adoration, from selfadoration.com, author, philosopher. One thing that we did bring up last time, in passing, we didn't delve too deeply into it, was your belief or your position that custody of children in case of separation or divorce should be default to the father. Did I get that about right?
That's correct. And it's not a novel position. To the contrary, it is essentially Western civilization. It's the way things were done everywhere in the West, everywhere that you can make a landline phone call. What's the West? It's anywhere where you can go and pick up a telephone and make a phone call. That's the West. And obviously now with the advent of cell phones and satellite phones, you can make a call from anywhere. So that's why I say a landline phone call. But until 1835, no one ever thought to question this. The proto-Marxists in London set about to undermine the idea of custody to the father with the idea that so-called tender years doctrine, that children in their tender years, meaning the nursing years, need to be with their mother, and that anything that would split the children away from their mother, blah, blah, blah. This is really brilliant on the part of the Marxists, in the sense that they understood that the most fundamental building block of Western civilization was the father-led family, was the hoplite family. And they figured out how to destroy it by the most efficient possible means, simply by undermining fatherhood. And it took a long, long time to do it. From 1835 to 1965, I guess, is when Ronald Reagan signed a no-fault divorce in California, which started the trend of no-fault divorce nationwide in the United States. By 1970, the battle was over. By 1970, all sorts of growth curves hit a knee and started trending downward instead of steadily upward, ever upward. We just got news this week, or last week, I guess, about decline in IQ in the United States. This is literally proof of the Flynn effect. The Flynn effect was, I guess, first presented in the bell curve, but argues that middle class values, the adoption and pursuit of middle class values over time will cause increases in IQ, which of course we've seen in India, for instance. As people get richer, their kids get smarter. Well, no, their kids aren't actually getting smarter. Their kids are being prepared better, and it's that preparation that's showing up in the IQ test, which, you know, not to get too diverted here, but that tends to buttress the argument that IQ is cultural rather than genetic, and maybe we need to identify better ways of finding true intelligence as opposed to evidence of good preparation. But regardless, those curves all started to trend downward in 1970, practically speaking, as a result of having undermined fatherhood over the course of the last 150 years, continuing now for another 75 years. This has been devastating for children who otherwise would have been brought up properly. It has completely destroyed any possibility that they might have a cogent, rational, father-led home that results in children who are very much like their parents, very much like their grandparents, very much like their siblings and cousins, and in consequence, ultimately, very much like their own grandchildren, that their grandchildren will tend to live out the traditions of that family because that family coheres, and it coheres because it's led by a father. It's led by a father because that father's rights in patrimony are not being undermined by the state. I think your goal is to identify a way to get back to that, or for me to be able to identify a way to get back to that. My answer, frankly, would be collapse, but we can talk about other methods if you like.
Wow. So there's a lot there, but
There's a lot.
Marxists are nothing if not brilliant strategists.
I think so. Really, seriously, the whole idea of 5D chess and Trump, you know, whether or not Trump is really a good strategist or just a very pugnacious man, very good at fighting back.
I'd say the latter.
Yeah, I think so. But Marx and the Marxists were amazingly good strategists 200 years before any of us saw them coming.
Yeah, I think Trump definitely shows us that in order to win, you need to keep fighting. And when he keeps fighting, he wins. I think with COVID, he said, "Oh, wait a minute, I think this isn't my fight." And he sort of backed off, and
They pushed him.
That's when he lost, right?
They pushed him. They got him. He did it other ways too. There was a hue and cry about vaping that turned out to be counterfeit marijuana vapes, but Trump immediately banned flavored vapes. The same thing he did when the shooting occurred in Las Vegas.
With the
this is the source of many a zillion conspiracy theories, but when it happened, there was another huge hue and cry over bump stocks, and Trump immediately banned bump stocks. God bless the courts. They just threw out that stupid ban because obviously the United States government has no authority to regulate firearms accessories. That's what they're trying to do right now with arm braces for AR-15 pistols, to outlaw arm braces. This is an accessory. There is no provision in law for this, and it's retarded anyway. The Second Amendment was a huge mistake ultimately because all it did was create endless ground for quibbling over what was understood at the time to be every gentleman's right. It's the way that you distinguish a gentleman from a slave is the right to bear arms. This goes back to Rome, possibly to Greece. But the right to bear arms is ancient. It has nothing to do with a document that was ratified in 1791. This is the right of every human being to engage in self-defense, and there cannot possibly be any sort of, why are we diverting ourselves in this way?
We forget that there's nothing gentle about gentlemen, if I could just say, get that one in there.
I kind of like to stress it. It's a gentle man. He is nevertheless a man, but he is gentle in his comportment until it's necessary for him to be violent. Yeah, and when it's necessary for him to be violent, he should be ruthlessly violent, unlimited in his violence, because this is the only way that we contain the world to gentle behavior, is by ridding it of the ungentle behavior. I think that every every self-responsible adult, men and women, should be armed at all times and should be prepared to engage in lethal violence at all times. And the other end of that is, I think that when someone makes evident that he intends to break the peace, in other words, when he presents a weapon and threatens somebody with it, at that point, that person should be exterminated as much as possible, as often as possible, as expeditiously as possible, obviously as safely as possible. But the solution to violent crime is not trial and incarceration. The solution to violent crime is instant death. And were we to, again, this is a stupid policy that, that we initiated as a result of idiot Marxists and their bleeding heart accomplices. But this was the way things were done forever in Western civilization, is that when someone presented the threat of violence, he was immediately exterminated. And it does two things. It rids the world of adult predators, and it provides an opportunity for younger would-be predators to learn better, to find either a more middle-class way of providing for themselves, or at least providing better subterfuge in their predation so that they're not so obvious as to get killed at the instant that they make it obvious what they are. But our solution to crime is idiotic. It virtually guarantees that there will be more of it, whereas in fact we could eradicate this. Again, the solution is fatherhood. There shouldn't be any criminals. The fact that there are criminals tells us that we're an underfathered civilization, that we're not doing it right. We've got it all wrong. But assuming there will be some who slip through the cracks, even in a situation where default custody to the father results, once again, in well-fathered families where children do not engage in predation because they would not want to shame their father. I mean, that literally is the reason why people behave in a state of civility. Why they are civil is because they are habitually civil. They are civil by habit from childhood, from toddlerhood. And they adopted those habits because the people who were raising them were very good at conveying how disappointed they were in them when they did badly. And they stopped doing badly when they were 3 and 4 and 5 years old, and they've never done badly ever since. And this is what causes civility. What causes civility is good parenting, good upbringing. Good upbringing is only possible in father-led homes because the chaos that results from disposing of the father, from dispensing of the father, makes upbringing of any sort impossible.
Simply amazing. Like the
It's
child,
all one thing.
the boy who wants to present a positive image of his father by behaving well in public. Right. So I going back to the gentleman, the idea of a gentleman, when I remember reading the Three Musketeers back, like, this is not going back too far because I never read it in school. But when I finally learned what a gentleman was, it was not a gentleman. It was a man who follows and defends the rules, not necessarily the rule of law, but the rules of society. And when he sees them being broken, he is ready to throw down, right? That's what a gentleman was, right? What I was just blown away reading that book, that novel, when he's the main character, D'Artagnan, is off. I'm going by memory here. He's set off by his father, and his father implores him to never back down from a fight. And first thing that happens to him is somebody makes fun of his horse, and he gets into a big dust up and gets his butt handed to him. Like, this is what I'm like, this is what a gentleman is supposed to be. Like, I'm blown away because all I was taught was that never fight, never start a fight. This was the idea.
These are pretty Roman ideas.
Today's gentleman is supposed to call the cops when he sees something go bad, right? Call the cops, and some big burly guy with a 5'2" female partner will come in
eventually
and record the crime, that's already occurred, right? And
for insurance purposes.
for insurance purposes. That is the point of police. And Canada is way more farther down that road than the United States. We are not allowed to. Recently, somebody defended their home with a gun. Now, I think there's criminal behavior, but he legally owned a gun, and somebody came from the other side of town and showed up at their door, and shots were fired, and he, for defending his home and family, was charged with murder. To me, this is just backwards, and this is what Canada has. But with fathers, there you don't get criminal behavior at that level. With a well-fathered society,
less over time. I mean, I'm not promising instant miracles, but
no.
But less over time, and it really does boil down to what happens in the first 5 years. That until a child wakes up, they're relatively plastic, and I'm not inviting people to treat their children with plasticity, but how they're going to turn out is very much a function of your expectations. And so if you only tell your children the truth and you only accept the truth back from your children, they will not become liars. And if they don't become liars, they won't become thieves. And it really ultimately boils down to parental approval, or the approval of whomever is the father figure. It could be a grandfather, it was in my case, or it could be our Heavenly Father, you name it, whatever it is for you, whatever it is in your home, in your life, but in your faith tradition, in your culture, in your civilization. And I can't say what that might be, but there is an idea in your head that if I engage in this behavior, I will bring shame upon myself in the eyes of someone who I do not want to be ashamed of me. And that's the only actual stay on bad behavior for human beings. That's the only thing that keeps us from behaving badly where we otherwise might get away with it, is that aversion in our own minds, not wanting to bring shame upon ourselves, or not wanting to be seen behaving shamefully in someone else's eyes. And absent that, there is no restraint, and lacking that restraint, anything goes. This is not good. And taking people who are well brought up and who have behaved appropriately in an awful situation and incriminating them only serves to make everything worse. You're just licensing crime. You're telling the criminals anything goes.
And as we can see in society today, there is virtually no shame. And this is what I hope to be getting to later about accepting one lie leads only to more falsehood, and you can't go back. And you can go back at any time, but you need to say, I believed a lie, and this is the truth. Is now you have to start telling and believing the truth, and you can erase all of the falsehood that you did follow along. But once you go down that path of believing one lie, it just piles on and piles on. So there was a tweet recently. I put it in the thread for this podcast, and it was about having the race swapping in historical figures in movies. And as you
brought up D'Artagnan, and it's just been driving me crazy. They're doing, the BBC or somebody in Great Britain, they're doing a production of the Three Musketeers, and D'Artagnan will be black. And it's just, this happens all the time now. But it's so funny because Dumas, the author of the book, is black. There is a wonderful story here with a black character that they're completely ignoring while they make one. What?
His father was half black, and he was a famous general. He was Napoleon's top general.
Even better, another great story. Dusable was the founder of Chicago, a black man, French. There are just amazing stories, not even ignoring all of that. I mean, all of sport, all of music, especially jazz. I mean, there are just amazing stories about Black protagonists that would make wonderful cinema. I would love to see the movie of Thelonious Monk. I mean, I know it's going to be awful in places,
Oh,
but
didn't he spend like years in his apartment alone with a piano?
this may be the case. But yeah, Monk was seriously crazy. I mean, and unfortunately, Monk would be drugged out of his creativity by now. He wouldn't even exist, and so that's maybe another reason to tell his story. But there are just so many stories in African American history, but African history all over the world. I mean, African French history is full of great stories. Why the hell are we not telling these stories?
Yeah, but once you accept that Queen Charlotte can be played by a Black person, then I guess it wouldn't matter if you were to play Muhammad Ali, right? Am I getting this right? Like, I accept
That's not the way it works. That's not the way it works.
Why
And
not?
this is all about this. There's a fundamental unfairness here, right? Kathleen and I have been talking about it lately. I was aware of this when I was in New York as a kid. I grew up in Illinois, and I moved to the big city as soon as I could, as soon as I got out of high school. And I was in New York, 16 years old, on my own, watching this incredible, this incredible tableau going on all around me. And I realized very early that the welfare system, the welfare state, recapitulates the plantation system. It's Marx said, history always repeats itself. The second time is farce. And the welfare system in New York at that time was very much a recapitulation of the plantation system in the South. The role of slaves and slave owners had been inverted, and of course, it was done at a pittance. But nevertheless, it really was an inversion of status. So, for instance, you'd be standing in an elevator, and in New York, space is wealth. I mean, space is wealth. There is no space. There is no space to be shared. So the more of it you can occupy, the wealthier you are. And so you're standing in an elevator, and everybody's cramped up tight to occupy as little space as possible. And then a Black gangbanger gets on the elevator and stands with his feet spread apart and his hands at his waist, his elbows out, taking up absolutely as much space as possible. This is very much the conduct of a Roman equestrian 2,000 years ago, swaggering around in the forum, knowing that he can get away with it because he's got a broadsword and you don't. And it really was an eye-opener for me to see this tableau being worked out. I mean, it was really tragic and really, really sad because these people are trapped in this system. I mean, it really is it's a trap. It's like a mousetrap where the mice aren't even permitted to die. They're just enslaved. I mean, they're literally incarcerated in public housing, incarcerated in terrible government schools, and then ultimately incarcerated in prisons. And the whole system exists. Also, this is the really funny part, is that they create this pretend plantation system, but in actual reality, the whole system exists for the employees of the system. It's a total Gramscian system, and it exists to provide jobs for the people who are shuffling these poor victims of the welfare state through the various stages of their incarceration.
That's the entitlement of teachers above all is ridiculous. In Ontario, and most of Canada, in order to teach, you need to get a master's degree in teaching. And the idea is, as soon as you get, it's a little bit tough. There's a lot of work once you get your master's in ed, depending on your specialty. To get into the job, you have to get in the union. But once you do, you're set for life, and you will never have to worry about working again, because you have this massive union that is taking from one hand and feeding the other. Like they're a massive voting bloc, and they fund the candidates that they want, and it's a huge influence. And it's the entitlement that teachers have, that they can get this because they have this degree. Now they are set for life, and they'll always have a job. And the bureaucracy, for every teacher, there's two bureaucrats somewhere. Like, It's well, at least one. At least one. I don't want to get out of hand or heard somebody accuse me of hyperbole or something like that. But for every teacher, there's a bureaucrat typing memos and sending and organizing events for the teachers, a reason to get them out of class and give them special training. And welfare is just like that. But Marxists, that 80% of Marxists are just people that they don't want to work.
Yep.
Right? Like they just want to get value from other people without doing the labor. And they think, oh, if you're on welfare, then obviously you're not working. So it's not slavery, but they are being used as slaves, but their work is done in a ballot box in a voting booth.
Yeah, and now you don't even have to vote. All you have to do is register.
Scratch your yeah. Well, it used to be like you had to physically pick up a pencil and scratch an X in a box.
No, all you got to do is register at this address, not your home address, so that your ballot comes to us and we'll take care of it for you.
We still it's a little bit loose, but we still require ID. I have to show ID anyways, but apparently
that's racist. We can't require ID. We can require ID for everything else.
There's a loophole, but I like you would be able to vote if I went in and swore that you were the person you said you were. And you just need somebody to go there and swear an affidavit that this person is the person on the voter registration, and that's that. Go in there and here's your ballot, sir. So it's being abused, apparently.
If voting could make any difference, they wouldn't let us do it.
Well, we're not going down that road.
It's a fun little activity. And after this, we're going to have cookies and then we're going to take a nap.
Yeah. So once every 4 years or so, they do labor for the establishment, and they get paid subsidized housing and a check every 2 months, and they look the other way if you're doing a little from some side jobs or dealing drugs. Wow. Anyways, the solution is fatherhood, and I just want to say we're not trying to impose a legal framework of default custody, but it's something that should be. It
would be a wonderful thing, and it's probably easier than getting rid of the state universities or getting rid of liability limitation, for instance. But it is a great big hurdle as a political goal for now. But it is definitely a goal to keep in mind going forward, because my take, at least, even allowing for the possibility that they might not crash this house of cards, given the state of finance that we're over leveraged. Literally, the whole world is over leveraged by who knows how many factors, 39-1 or more. Entirely plausible that they will solve the problem by overturning the monopoly board, which is what you do when you play Monopoly with a crooked banker. But even allowing for that not happening, my take is that only driven, and especially driven sociable people, are going to reproduce propitiously going forward. And so those dads in due course will definitely have the political power to change custody laws. And frankly, they're good enough dads that they don't really need to worry about custody laws right now. I mean, that literally is the solution for all men, is not to change the law, but up your fatherhood game, up your husband game, up your man game, because there should be no threat that your woman would want to go shopping for someone else if you're literally delivering the goods that you promised in the first place. And so that is my answer to men, is that if there's any Mr. Maybe in your marriage, get him the fuck out. You got to be Mr. Marriage.
It's up to men to step up.
And I'm not absolving anyone else, but the fact of the matter is the polis of the family is led by the father. And if the father is not holding up his end, no one else will either. This is the way leadership works, is that leadership is more than just going first, but you better believe that leadership definitely is going first. And if dad is not going first into the fray, there is no one to follow him, because Why would
Mhm.
there's if anyone is going into the fray other than dad, that's the actual father of the family, and that happens. That children take over when their parents are ineffectual. Um, but leadership definitely is going first, and if dad is not going first and is not leading the way with an exemplary performance. Exemplary is one of those words that we throw around as if we know what it means, but what it literally means is by leading by a great example. It is a perfect example. Like an exemplary performance is a performance to be held up as an example. And this is what fathers need to do in everything that they do. Husbands need to do in everything that they do, that men need to do in everything that they do. And if we're holding up our end and the rest of the family isn't, then we have a right to complain. And frankly, this is the leadership opportunity that's literally evidence that leadership mutiny is evidence of a failure of leadership. Mutiny is the thing that we always want to respond to. We always want to respond to the failure of the system by going after the person who points out the failure, but that's obviously incorrect. If there is mutiny to your leadership, it's because your leadership is wrong. It's an error. Correct your errors. Do better.
Yeah, this is what initially attracted me way back when. I don't know what year that was, but part of my awakening was back when we had the anti-feminists and MGTOW movements just were starting to go. And I, sorry if I call MGTOW a movement, but it's a group of men discussing their ideology or what they think they should do. And I was already married with 2 kids, young at that time, and I'm realizing what it showed to me in stark reality was that marriage is a tough situation. It needs good leadership,
Mhm.
and I discovered this basically out of logically. I'm in a marriage. I've got to recommit myself, and that's what I did. And the following 10-15 years were quite went quite well. If I can do say so myself, I think everything. I'm in a fairly good place. COVID
Dude,
was
you're still
difficult.
married.
I'm still
You're,
married.
you're still
My kid,
married. You are now. I mean, at least the 10% and possibly the 1%. I don't know, but
yeah. Well,
3 cheers, 3 cheers for you. And my hat is off to your sons too. I'm delighted for them because there is no better situation for them to be in than to have mom and dad together and
and
pull it together as a team. And that's the whole family pulls together as a team. That's
we
the beauty
usually
of it all.
sit down for dinner every day. Like, and now they're busy. They got their own lives, jobs, activities, friends. So it starts to loosen up. You loosen up a little bit. They're more independent. But that's what I'm most proud of is that my 2 sons are independent people with their own thoughts, their own mind, their own friends, their own lives that they're seeking to build. And my marriage is good. I can still carry on a conversation with my wife every morning, right? And I look and it's like that's more and more that is becoming rare. Um, like a lot of people around us have not been as successful, and we try to keep our group together. And I credit you a lot for your inspiration. But I was already on that road because it's obvious that the father has to be able to lead. It doesn't mean he's um, a tyrant or like bossing people around, but I'm sorry, I'm the one that's most difficult to convince to do anything. But once I make up my mind, I do it. Right. And that's my personal style of leadership. I'm not
Fatherhood is
going
follow through. I mean, it's not, it can be words, but I think the Greeks and ultimately the Catholics set the best example that formal celebration of doctrine is something you do 1 hour a week. And living through the doctrine is what you do the rest of the week. And fatherhood is follow through. It's your kids seeing you do that yard work, seeing you do the caulking and painting, seeing mom do the kitchen work. It's, the kids being inducted into the labor force, willing or nilly, as Shakespeare would have it, willing or not. That's how it's done. It's done by example, not by precept, but literally by example. Yeah. And frankly, if the two are not aligned, it doesn't really matter. If you say one thing and do another, your children are not going to do it. They're going to do what you do, not what you say. But that literally is the path of inculcation for children, the path of cultivation of upbringing is doing what you're doing because they're seeing you do it.
Yeah. And that was just it. Everybody I listen as a father, listen to what everybody wants. And then I say, okay, I'm convinced. Let's do it. Get in the car I'm driving, right? And that's the minivan, the family. I never owned a minivan.
Too. The dad is in the driver's seat. Mom is in the passenger seat. She's riding shotgun. The kids are in the back, and dad is aimed forward to get you guys where you're going. Mom is directed backward to keep the peace inside the car. This is how the division of labor works out. I wrote a book about this. This is what Father's Day is about.
It is
about that organization, the family minivan, and how it's organized and why it's organized that way, and why, when it is organized that way, it works.
It is the natural default way. It doesn't mean you can't be flexible at times, but
of course, no, it's not. It's not
back into this very basic arrangement, because
I don't believe this anyway. I don't believe that we ever were really that rigid. That's just another thing that feminists say in order to undermine what was good about those standards. As they say, oh, but they were so rigid. There was no. Of course, there was flexibility, and there always is, because nobody is really enforcing these rules except by, watching what other people are doing. People do what they see other people doing, and so they watch what the neighbors are doing, and they start doing things that way. This is how good examples spread, but there's literally nobody enforcing any of this. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up, and this is another mistake that we inherited from feminism, and it really undermines male leadership in the home, is the idea that, since men and women are political equals, that in the home, the leadership role should be evenly divided. Well, no, they shouldn't. Dad literally should be leading the family forward, being focused on the world outside the home. And mom literally should be leading the family inward toward each other by focusing on the inside of the home. And this division of labor makes perfect sense. And obviously we'll deviate from it all through the day, different ways, different things. She's driving because I'm carrying the toolbox in my lap to do what I'm going to do when we get to wherever we're going. There's no reason that women shouldn't be driving, but in the minivan of your family, in the metaphor of the minivan of your family, dad drives and mom rides shotgun. And if you try to organize it the other way, it will fall apart. Men will not willingly and enduringly accept female dominance. They will engage in mutiny in a situation where the female taking the dominant role, where the female is trying to be the boss of the family. Mm-hmm. Dad will rebel, and chances are the older sons will rebel also, because men don't accept female dominance for long. That's why I don't really accept the longhouse argument. The longhouse is only made possible by male power. And if you strip away that male power, then the longhouse collapses immediately. Who built the longhouse? That's my question. We have the structure. Who built it? The people who built it are the ones who have the power, and they're men.
Yeah, well, the matriarchal societies aren't necessarily the inverse of patriarchal societies. It doesn't mean that you have families with female in control. Like you have in a matriarchal society, you have room for fewer males, because the women will gravitate to the high status men, and they will gladly share time with a high status man with other females. And you don't get that family structure. What you get are harems and groups of women that and men basically competing for a share of the women, and the top man will get the lion's share and divide the remaining women with his favored men. Right. So you'll have a smaller group of men with all the women, and the lower status men get gradually pushed out.
Yeah, I don't believe any of this.
You don't believe
I
that?
just,
I,
I don't believe any of it. No.
okay.
The fact of the matter is the Margaret Mead anthropology is concerned with extreme outliers in the first place, and possibly extreme outliers that only exist on the basis of hidden subsidies from the West. Um, Tribal civilizations, I mean, it's sort of like endangered species. Endangered species are a great holy cow in the United States. But what an endangered species actually is a bad adaptation to its environment. We're talking about a creature that is going extinct not because of human intervention or because we built highways or blah, blah, blah. It's going extinct because it's adapted poorly to its environment, and therefore it's not getting enough food to breed propitiously and therefore maintain a population. And for human beings, for people to get all worked up about what is in fact the natural course of evolution is strictly absurd. And so the same thing goes for the Margaret Mead style of tribes. If they actually do exist, and if they exist as described, they're completely marginal, and their ongoing existence is entirely contingent upon the continued perfect performance of a failed survival strategy. The fact that we're documenting failed survival strategies alone strikes me as being absurd, but ultimately I'm skeptical that these tribes exist even at all, that they even exist, that they're not strictly made up by Marxists as further proof of the undermining of the obvious intelligence of particularly DS Western family structures. That literally is their goal, is to undermine the father-led family. And so anthropology, cultural anthropology in particular, becomes a vital weapon in that battle, in my opinion. I don't trust any of it. And I was at one time an anthropology major. Sad to say, I don't normally admit to any sort of higher education, but there was a time when I infected my brain with it. And I'm completely dubious of all of it. I think it's all made up by Marxists, and none of it is to be trusted.
Well, it is interesting. So I know there's some areas where we can agree, but this is a very deep, deep well of thought.
It's not though. That's the point. It's not. It's 500, allegedly 500 tribes consisting of 35 to 50 people. So 500 times 50 is 25,000 people worldwide. Who gives a rat's ass? We're not talking about a small town. We're talking about a mining town in Saskatchewan, 25,000 people. Who gives a rat's ass?
Well, this is where I believe we developed from these types of, there were these types of tribes, but then
a long time ago,
a patriarchal society developed.
They had to defend the land. Do you understand that? They got to a point where they had to defend the land. They were hunter-gatherers or they were herders, and so they didn't live any particular place. They moved with the food supply. And then when they became agrarians, when they became farmers, and they had to become farmers because they out-ate the food supply. But when they became farmers, they had to defend the land. And in order to defend the land, they needed defenders. Guess who the defenders are? The big ones with the wide shoulders. Changes everything.
Something to delve into further much down the line, but we still need to, we had some an interesting podcast. I know there was a lot of discussion, but some
Leo won't shut up today. I'm sorry.
A little bit light on the ideas, but it was still an interesting topic.
I thought it was fascinating. It wasn't what I was expecting at all. The resurrection of reality in philosophy. I mean, this is what Ayn Rand lived and died for. But it's not just her. There are a lot of people who were involved in that side of the epistemological argument. But the other end of the argument that they were making, the sort of the back to the land argument, I thought that was a real interesting take on realism in real life. In other words, not simply upholding realism as a philosophical idea, but literally getting your hands dirty.
Well, if you really okay, so the podcast we're talking about is Online Great Books Podcast. Uh, just to get that in there, to give credit. So the if you really want to get your kids connected to reality, you need to teach them something uh, tangible about the best way to do that, and most thorough way would be to bring them out onto a farm or a homestead and get them involved in produce, like build a life on the land, and get them involved in producing and caring for producing food and caring for animals and taking care of building structures and shelters and things like that. That is extreme, but I don't think you need to go that extreme. Like if you getting out of cities is a bit of a meme in the right side of the internet. Get out of cities is not a bad idea, because you need to get away from mainstream education. At least give them some kind of inoculation to the constant ideological programming that they're getting online and in the education system and through their television programs and TikTok videos. So I personally, I was my dad took me hunting. He took me shooting and fishing. I take my kids fishing. I don't go. I don't do hunting because darn it, it's just too hard these days. It's hard. I mean, you want to take you got to take a week off and go out into the woods and sit there and then drag some animal back home and clean it and cook it and put it in the freezer. It's a lot of work, and I can just work all day and go to the grocery store and bring home a slab of steak and put it on the grill. But I teach them skiing. I taught them snowboarding. These types of uh, real life physical work is uh, is important, and it is an inoculation to the rejection of reality and the rejection of hierarchy. You put them on a hockey team. My kids play hockey. You put them on a hockey team, and immediately every kid there knows who's the best player and who's the worst player, and who are the mediocre players, and who's got this skill, who's best at that. They automatically determine that. You can do it with anything. You don't have to do sports necessarily.
This is boys. This is boys. It doesn't work for girls. They're not the same. And if you make it co-ed, it won't work anymore either. I mean, I don't want to ever take a position that people can say, oh, he's just being sexist. And I'm literally not. It literally is a difference between the way boys compete and girls cooperate. And it's a real radical difference in that environment where you have an all male environment where excellence is a well understood standard, and everybody knows where they rank on that standard of excellence, and knows how they can elevate their position, and also knows how they can move backward just by getting lazy and stupid. They all know it, and they all respond to it, and they all rise. This is a beautiful thing. This is the skate park phenomenon. It's the same thing. And anytime you have male only environments where those kind of objective standards exist, you're going to see that same sort of surging toward excellence, which is why I want default custody for fathers, because the same thing happens, that same sort of surging toward excellence, that everybody is aware of what everybody else is doing, and they're all working at getting better. And what more could we ask for from humanity than for everybody to be working all the time at getting better?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think those aspects of humanity are both found in both girls and boys, but in different dosages, different measures, right? It's more often and more.
Well, here's the way to say it: boys cooperate by competing, and girls compete by cooperating. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, the girls
Very
will
good.
do all kinds of competitive stuff, but the competitive stuff they do will not be at all like what the boys were doing before the girls showed up.
The one of the things that the Online Great Books podcast touched on was the resentment driving the upending of hierarchy. And I think the source of that is a more, it's a more female uh, response to somebody being better than you, to resent them. You have the Nancy Cardigan fiasco. What happened with the figure skater? Which one was the Nancy Cardigan was the one that was,
Nancy Kerrigan was the one who got hit, and
yeah.
I forget the other one's name. But there was just happened a couple of days ago at the girls' basketball game. One girl hit another as they were doing the handshake line at the end of the game. So the girl from the losing team hit the girl from the winning team. She got arrested as being charged with assault. We'll see what happens. But and I'm not gonna criticize women that way at all. I don't even thoroughly understand it. I've heard it described in the conflict resolution strategies, different conflict resolution strategies among men versus among women. And as soon as the group goes co-ed, then suddenly the women's standard is the one that's being used. With exceptions, the exception would be the occasional girl who shows up at the skate park. She has to live by the boy rules. If you get 10% girls at the skate park, you probably got different rules.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely the girl who will go along with boy stuff, and
Literally because she has to, because she's outnumbered.
she
And she
wants.
doesn't mind it because she wants to be there for the boy stuff. There again, do we
Right.
allow for exceptions in sexual behaviors? Obviously, if you don't, then you're going to have to build bigger prisons. But there are some girls who really, really like to do what boys do, not necessarily all the time and not necessarily in bed, but in terms of their recreation. I have a niece who's like that, very athletic, very, very outdoorsy. She and her husband are hikers, and they do all kinds of incredibly dangerous stuff together. Again, what you were talking about, an acculturation with danger in youth, so that when you grow up, you can manage it. You're not paralyzed by your fear. I'm leading you astray again. I'm sorry.
Sorry, just lost you there for a second. So it was, yeah. I don't. This is another rabbit hole going down. What is the difference? Because when you want to try to define what is the difference between boys and girls, there's always going to be the exception, and there's always the it's that's what I mean is there's it's not that boys are do one thing and girls all do the other thing. It's that there's a little bit of overlap, but there's a more masculine uh, way of dealing with problems and a more feminine way of dealing with problems, and it's 60-40, 80-20 type of split, right? Guys have to compete and cooperate, and girls have to cooperate, and there is still a level of competition, but Marxism trains people to be resentful, and that you can I would classify that as a more feminine way of responding to somebody who being better than you. Boys naturally fall into hierarchy, and as long as they have a place in that hierarchy, it doesn't like you join a team, you put on a team. It doesn't matter if you're the top dog or the bottom dog, as long as you know your place and you
Provided you're
accept
not
it.
trapped. As long as you know you're not trapped, those organizations will not work. In other words, for instance, if the coach is corrupt and makes his own son the quarterback, even though his son really should be on the second string, then the whole organization will fail because it's corrupt. And
If it's well,
male only organizations will thrive and will supervene all expectations as long as they're objective and honest.
mhm.
But as soon as they're corrupt in any way, they'll fail just because of the same kind of mutiny that you would find in any other badly led organization.
Yeah, well, team sports has that aspect to it. You have a leader, you have an organization, everything is done, there's an authority. As long as the authority understands this, which I find the sporting authorities lately have shied away. They're starting to get afraid of this natural hierarchy, and they're more worried about bullying and the wrong word being said on the pitch or on the field or on the rink than they are about what does it take to be a hockey player. Well, means being part of a team, and if it's a team that's selected, it's usually better. But a house league team, you're going to get anybody who's at that level is welcome to come and play, and you just have to accept it. And the best teams I've seen, they from top to bottom, they accept their role and they respect each other. And as long as they're doing their best and they're following the system as outlined by the positive minded coach, things go great. And you see teams that don't seem to have the greatest skill level making it to the final and doing what nobody expected them to do at the beginning of the year. So, but I've seen teams with great skills, lots of great players. They end up floundering because someone down that line doesn't like their spot on the hierarchy and doesn't want to play the system that's being outlined. And if it's not nipped in the bud, it becomes a cancer, and the team fails. But it comes down to if you're a well-fathered kid, you're going to accept your role because there's a million hierarchies, right? Yep. There's not one single hierarchy. You want to play hockey, it means you accept that there's a hierarchy of hockey players. You want to play forward, you want to play defense, there's hierarchies within that hierarchy. So you need to be able to accept a place in that. Otherwise, it's Nietzsche's will to power, where everybody is trying to be the top dog on the team, and you have this fight at the top between the top skilled guys, and nothing gets accomplished because the resentment builds. And if you're not trained by a father, I mean, a mother can teach that if she knows what is going on, but she can teach it well. So just because I'm saying that you need a father doesn't mean that you're hopeless if you're raised by a single mother. Mother can do this, but it's better, it's more natural, and it's more likely to happen under tutelage of a good father, guidance of a good father.
And good male role models generally. That is the solution for the children of single mothers, is who else? And going back to the idea of matriarchal societies, that often it's her brothers who matter. Again, attributing truth to these reports, to cultural anthropological reports, which, as I insist, are dubious. If you dig deep into the family and there is no role for the father, well, who's handling the male stuff? It's her brothers. And that is the case in the welfare state also, is that the strong male role model in the family typically is not the father, but very often is mom's brothers, or mom's father, or mom's father's brothers, or whatever, uncles. There are uncle networks that go along with jobs that are difficult to get if you are not connected to the uncle network. So, for instance, baggage claim at American airports. I don't know what the situation is in Canada. You don't have a lot of Black people anyway. But in the United States, the baggage claim outside the airport, when you pull up in your car and you're pulling your bags out and you're going to give them to the guy and he's going to give you a tag, that guy will almost always be Black, and he will have gotten that job because his uncle has that job. And the people who are working in that job in airports all over America are connected into those jobs because they're in that uncle network. It's not father nepotism, it's uncle nepotism. But there are if you see a man behaving successfully in the world, there is some male role model in his life who made that possible. And it may have been a fictional character. That unfortunately there are children who grow up in situations that are so awful that the only reference they have to civilized behavior is fictional characters. But this is why Carnegie built libraries. We can all rise above our circumstances, and God bless the people who do.
Hmm. That is, I don't know what to add to that. It's perfect. I've noticed this tendency in uh, American airports, and I just get the notion that this person I'm talking to has a network and is connected and got this job and protects it and protects his.
And I did the follow through too. Again, fatherhood is follow through. And the guys who are recruiting their nephews into those jobs are beating them upside the head every time they get something wrong. And for the first year, I mean, it's like an apprentice with your on-call until you are yet another champion of high standards. And that's another thing that's beautiful about it, is that the guys who are doing this have extremely high standards, who are very much dedicated to the work that they're doing, and they do great work, and they raise great nephews. It's not like they're raising great sons, but they're raising great nephews by doing this. And it's a great thing. It's a good thing. We could wish for a better commitment to fatherhood among all poor Americans, among all poor people, but especially among poor Black people, because they're suffering so much from a lack of good
and
masculine upbringing. But there are people who are plugging the gaps, and I'm all for them. I think it's great.
Yeah, and this is another problem with aspect of Marxist resentment, is that you need to be trained how to learn and how to receive criticism. This correction that you're talking about.
The right time for that is when you're 3, though. That's the right time for that to happen.
And if you're primed to resent it, but once you get into the education system, this is amplified. Kids are being trained that they should be resentful of the system, of their parents, of anybody who tells them that they're wrong. And if you get into the workplace, and this will even erode this uncle network that you're saying, when your uncle says, "Look, buddy, buck up. You got a problem here at work."
That could happen. Keep in mind that what we're talking about in this uncle network, it's all men. It's all men, and that it's just a wide open invitation to have it busted up. Maybe it's happened already. I don't fly anymore, so I don't even know. But yeah, it's a wide open invitation to break it up, because it's all men.
Amazing. So,
but as I don't know where we are time wise, but
over an hour now. So
over an hour, so we probably should let it go. I think the resentment angle is interesting because, yeah, we both kind of brought up two things that, as far as I'm concerned, that Marxism is patricide first. That Marxism emerges from disappointing sons, as it were. They don't have to be sons, but paternal disappointment in lazy children. And so even before patricide, Marxism is literally laziness first, and laziness is self-reproach, because laziness, the status of laziness, someone can call you lazy, but you would only call yourself lazy if you are knowingly avoiding work that you know you should be doing. And that kind of self-reproach, continuous self-reproach, mind you, starting in toddlerhood, before you're even able to understand the ideas that you're accusing yourself of, you're engaged in continuous self-accusation. And how does that externalize? Well, there it comes in the form of resentment, because you feel bad all the time and it can't possibly be your own fault.
Yeah. Self-reproach.
And there's your father or your mother going like that, shame, shame, shame on you. And there's the target, and it turns into genocidal patricide by proxy. Marxists can't kill their fathers enough. They just can't kill their fathers completely. So they have to keep killing them.
Well, we're going
That's a happy ending.
Yeah. Well, we're going to keep. I guess our goal is stop patricide, right? Stop killing the male.
Just
This
the
is where
default
we can.
custody to fathers is a solution to everything. It literally will solve every social problem that you can name, anything at all that you want to pick out, and say, "Good Lord, I wish that weren't happening." It will stop in due course as soon as we return default custody to fathers, because that was what built Western civilization. That's what built these giant towers that we surround ourselves with. That's what filled our skies with jet airplanes, that fills our skies more with satellites and sends probes to the moon and ultimately to Mars that will conquer the stars. All of that is masculine energy. All of that is done by fathers. And by undermining fatherhood, we undermine all of civilization. If we want it back, then default custody of fathers is the solution.
So if that's the solution, I would say that it starts with men of today. Start reaching for that leadership in a familial role. Look for becoming. Look for ways to become the leader of a family, and you will have greater impact in the future.
Right.
I try to say I've I've impacted the world by raising two sons more than I could have in any other way, barring some uh, fame worthy achievement, right? Like I bet you Elon Musk, if he does successfully send people to Mars, his greatest achievement, if you asked him on his deathbed, would probably be look at my children. Right? He's been able to do both. A lot of people can't. A lot of people, when they're fantastic, they're amazing artists, and they make great achievements, they don't have room to grow to raise a family. And you wouldn't want them. I mean, Thelonious Monk, you mentioned, probably. I don't know if he had children.
We met his son, T.S. Monk. We saw him play in Scottsdale. And he was pretty much together at the time that we met him, but his past had not been so peaceful.
Yeah.
Um,
But like these great
he's
genius.
an example, though, of what you're talking about. Trump's kids are pretty amazing. Ivanka is a little bit, a little too CI for me. Donald Jr. I think is amazing. Eric is amazing. Trump is ID, and ID typically makes a terrible father. I'm DI, and DI makes a terrible father. But ID is worse. Why are Trump's kids so great? Because they were raised by Spanish-speaking domestics. That's why. They were raised by very sociable people. And the children of the rich are often very nice, very sociable, very kind creatures, not because their parents are decent people, their parents are awful, but because they were raised by Spanish-speaking domestic servants.
Oh my goodness.
That was their real socialization came from nannies and nurses and hired help. And so they were raised with good Catholic values because they were raised by good Catholics.
Well, we don't have another hour to get into who's been raised by what, by whom, and how. But I will say that it's like the having children is the greatest potential effect you can have on the future that's accessible to the average person.
It is your foray into the future. Unless you are Elon Musk and you're building something of an institutional nature that will live beyond you, what will live beyond you is your children.
The anti-human, anti-natalist. I've been sparring with them sporadically on Twitter, just not for any purpose other than onlookers and inlookers. But they're convinced that having children is the worst thing you can do for the environment. And I'm like, I my position is that having children is the best thing you can do for the world. Having
Right.
children and raising them right. What influence do you have in the future? Well, I don't know, but when I see my kids having friends over and they're uh, lifting weights as well, they're playing video games too. But then they hit the weights and they see what their personal. They're working on their PRs on bench press or deadlift. I'm like, that right there is going to do more for the future than anything I could have accomplished in any other realm, in the business realm, or like barring like starting some great company like Tesla. Tesla, I think, is a great company. I've had issues with electric cars and things like that. We're not going to get into that, but other than inventing like the next, there's something to replace oil with, I think having kids is the best thing that the average person can do. And raising good, it's not that difficult to raise good kids. It just takes a lifetime of commitment, daily commitment. Every day you wake up and you say, I'm going to be a husband, a father, and I'm going to do what is necessary to make my world better. And my world is a family of four. I mean, I would have had more kids if I had started, if I'd been younger or richer, I say I would have had more kids. And that's my the only regret is that I didn't have more kids. But I'm done there. So I think we can leave it here for now. There was more, of course, there was more we wanted to get to, but we covered a lot of things that I wasn't expecting. I hope, I hope we get a few more viewers today. I'm just going to check on the stream here. I don't see any chat or anything going on, but I hope we get some more views after. Either way.
Like, subscribe, submit questions, be engaged, be involved. We want to do this, but we want to do it in a responsive way. And God help me, I will get out of my partner's way here, and we'll do a better job of covering the topics we set before us. But
I'm new at this, and I know you have been streaming, doing podcasts for a long time, and so you run with things, and I'm trying to direct it, but I also want it to flow like this. It's been great. I think this was a great stream.
bless you.
And I think we're going to have some more. I think we're going to have some more great streams, and this time for sure we're not doing it in 1 week. I moved it forward this week because I'm going to be busy next weekend, but so 2 weeks from now, we're going to plan another one. Another stream where we can agree.
Bravo.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Bless you. Thank you.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.